Because there is only one true and living God. Only one who can foretell what will happen, how Israel will be delivered from the nation of Babylon. God is the only true God, the only one who can and does save. God delivered Israel out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And God returned Israel from exile in Babylon. God's power to deliver, God's power to save shows God's sovereignty. There was no God before and there will be no God afterward. God is from eternity to eternity, from ancient days, and God reigns supreme. And in verse 10, God declares, "You are my witnesses." The other nations don't have true witnesses because they worship vain idols. But Israel, you are my true witnesses. You are the ones to tell the nations who I am. You are the witnesses to the fact that God is the only God, the Holy One of Israel. And so Israel, though they were deaf and blind, was still the ones that God chose to be witnesses to who God really is. And even as Israel was called to be witnesses, we too are called to be witnesses. But preacher, witnesses for who? All throughout Isaiah 43 it tells us, witnesses to the God who was before time. The God who created us and the God who formed us, the God who redeemed us and the God who says, you are mine, the God who says we are precious and honored, the God who loves us and the God who is with us, the God who will gather us from wherever we're scattered, and the God who makes rivers out of the desert, who gives water in the wilderness, the God who declared that even when we are deaf and blind, that we are the witnesses of who God really is. Tell me, who wouldn't serve a God like this? The psalmist says, who are we, God, that you are mindful of us? And who are we that you visit us? In Psalm 139 it says that you know my down sitting and my uprising. You know when I get up and when I lay down. You know every thought that I have. You are before me and you're behind me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. But we are called to be witnesses to this God, to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And you might say that Isaiah was written way back in 700 BC. But what does this have to do with today? Why are witnesses needed today? Well, I'm glad you asked. For all around us, people are worshiping false gods. They're giving all their devotion to gods who can't answer. The center of so many lives is money and greed and gaining material possessions and power and status. And some people's center is themselves. They're narcissistic and self-absorbed. And because of these empty things that they're worshiping, our news today is filled with stories of injustice and greed, violence and corruption, lawlessness and wickedness, misplaced values and apathy. Whether it be the local news where the police is tampering with evidence and there's bomb threats against the mayor, or the regional news where there's homicides in Camden and Philly all the time, whether it's state news where the state Supreme Court is going to hear the case on same-sex marriage, or the national news where the Congress